Okay.
And I want to say, here we go. Mary-Ann Ochota is a broadcaster and anthropologist. She has published books that have personally inspired me, such as Hidden Histories, A Spotter's Guide to the British Landscape, and Secret Britain, Unearthing Our Mysterious Past, just to name a few. She has also presented on Time Team, Britain Afloat, looking at historical boats throughout the UK, and Mystic Britain, working to find Britain's ancient landscapes and rituals. My personal favourite was her contribution to 2007's Dig at Silbury Hill programme. Her work on radio, TV, documentaries and writing only proves her endless passion for the study of people and how we got here. I personally found Mary-Ann by picking up her book Hidden Histories, show book, which takes you through fascinating ancient historical spots in the landscape and teaches you how to read the land. From walls, tracks, stone crosses, or even faint lines in the landscape, everything tells a story. Alongside many other inspirations, Mary-Ann's writing helped inspire me to create the new documentary series I've just made, The Middle of Nowhere. So as you can guess, I'm very excited to introduce the intelligent, the inspiring, the all-round icon, Mary-Ann Ochota. Thank you so much for coming. I'm overjoyed.
That is a lovely, lovely intro. Thank you very much. If you could just walk around with me in my regular day, just sort of making me feel great, that would be lovely. Thank you very much. It's a real pleasure to be able to chat about a thing that obviously we're both pretty geeky about. So yeah, long live the geeks.
It's really geeks. It's so cool, and I know this is almost like beside the point, but I feel really happy and there's lots of gratitude that you're a woman, and I know that's not completely important. But it's so nice to have more women talking about and inspiring each other to write, to read, to go outside. That's really important for me personally. So it's really nice that you're going out and inspiring people like me.
Yeah, and I mean I love that. I love it. I find writing books quite tricky. I don't like sitting on my own with a laptop. I like being out there and doing stuff and talking to people. But the thing that's kind of genuinely hugely gratifying particularly about Hidden Histories and Secret Britain, the two most recent archaeology books that I've written, is that I get to talk to people and about the books and kind of what it's unlocked for them. Either that it's kind of fueled a passion that was already there, or that they've discovered something new, or that they found a way maybe to share with their friends or with their kids this amazing treasury. And I genuinely find it properly exciting. I feel like being a landscape spotter, being a detective, and walking through what is otherwise a moderately boring or familiar field, or along a footpath, or through a wood, or staring at an old village wall or something, that actually if you can find those little clues, then you start to build a picture of what the story is. And I think one of the things that I'm really passionate about is that heritage, the history of all those ancient people who've come and gone and all made their mark in our landscape, that belongs to all of us. It doesn't just belong to slightly older people who are members of the National Trust, or people who are white British and can trace their family history back to a particular county of England or something like that. This belongs to all of us, and we are all, I guess, kind of active in writing its story and telling the history. So, it's super exciting to be involved with this. Elise, thank you for inviting me.
I'm so glad. And do you know what? This book is so thick. This must have taken you ages to write. I can't, anyone who hasn't got this book, right? Every single chapter, every single page, there is a completely different location. And it makes me realise how much travelling you've done, if anything, just to write this, and this is just one of many. So you've done a lot of work and a lot of consistent travelling to do this, and it comes across. Absolutely, it's great.
Oh, brilliant. That's kind of good to know. I think there are a couple of sites in Hidden Histories, full disclosure, where So I'm describing the site or the thing, what is it? What is this lump or bump? What might it be? What other things could it be, like the red herrings? And then some of the sites that I'm kind of referencing are ones where there's a particular detail or feature or pattern that's super interesting or really typical of everything else that you might spot in that region. And then at the end of each little section, there's a kind of finest 5, which was really hard sometimes, because picking just 5 really cool places to go and see dry stone walls or really cool places with amazing standing stones, it's quite hard, because then you kind of have favourites and you're like, oh, that one's really good, I want to put that one in, but oh, that means that I've got to lose this one, and they're kind of, it's hard choosing favourites. And also I wanted a regional spread, so it's really easy when you're particularly talking about something like prehistoric monuments to kind of get stuck and really have a sort of really overweighting for places like Wiltshire. And that sort of patch of the southwest, where you've got Stonehenge, you've got Avebury, you've got West Kennet Longbarrow, you've got Silbury Hill, you've got all these like really impressive monuments. And then poor old, I don't know, Nottinghamshire doesn't have much to kind of speak of. So sometimes it's kind of, it forced me to go, well, what is there in the Midlands? What's really cool? Or that bit of kind of Lancashire that I don't know very well. So it certainly made me discover and actually create a list of places that I want to go and visit as well, sort of to just go and check them out and see what's what.
Same. I want to go to Ireland personally and check out what's there.
Yes. Yeah. The Boyne Valley, they have a lot. I mean, all of Ireland, but even in just County Meath alone, where you've got Newgrange, you've got Knowth, and some of the other kind of chambered tombs. It's just astonishing. And everyone focuses on Stonehenge. I think Stonehenge is overrated. Don't bother going to Stonehenge. If you want to go to Wiltshire, I say go to Avebury, because you can kind of hug the stones at Avebury. You can really like be in the monument, whereas Stonehenge you have to stand on the side and like look at it.
What I've noticed, yeah, I completely agree. What I've noticed about your work and also my work, so I'm in the middle of production, and the series The Middle of Nowhere is about this presenter who can travel back in time to interview guests. Like we had me dressed up as a medieval woman, Bronze Age woman. And we're having a Roman soldier coming up next, because I'll be near this week. I'm going to the Sycamore Gap because it's quite iconic now, especially, and we'll talk about that bit later, I think. But the whole project has made me realise that people, they'll say Stonehenge is boring. And because they went once and they saw the stones and they're like, cool, it's stones in a field. But what the project has made me realise is that it's about exactly what your work is. It's about the landscape and translating that as a whole. So it's not just one area. So by Stonehenge, so I was talking to David Dawson, who's on the show, and he's amazing, and he's a director in Devizes Museum. Mm-hmm. And he was saying that he takes regular walks around the landscape of all of that area. So it's not just Stonehenge, but locally to Stonehenge, there's Woodhenge, there's West Kennet Longbarrow, there's Silbury Hill, and there's this big train of thought that all of these places are connected. And I reckon if somebody said, oh, I didn't like Stonehenge, if they were to do the whole walk, they would probably have a little bit more of a spiritual connection to this land and more of a historical connection and understanding of why these places are so brilliant, actually.
Yeah, absolutely, because you can't really make sense of it out of context, because otherwise you're exactly right. They have hit the nail on the head. You stand there and you stare at a bunch of stones and you're like, right, what do I do now? Like, how am I supposed to feel? And you go, wow, right, should we go to the cafe? And I mean, what are you supposed to do? It doesn't have any sort of, it doesn't mean anything emotionally, because you don't really know. You go like, oh, well, that's quite impressive-ish. So I absolutely agree. I think trying to experience the landscape, not just kind of understand it intellectually and try and remember a bunch of dates, is the key to making this matter and ultimately bringing it to life. And the other thing I think that we underestimate, both as archaeologists but also as members of the public who are kind of interested about this stuff, is that we tend to not see the natural features. Now, of course, the natural features that are in the landscape may well be different to what was there 4,000 or 5,000 years ago. Of course, the landscape is farmed, it's urbanized, there's, you know, an A road where there might otherwise have been a prehistoric trackway. But I think when you kind of try and factor in, okay, like, where are the wet places? Where are the places where you would have fresh water bubbling up from beneath the earth? Where are the places where you first see the sunrise or the sunset? Where are the places that make you feel high up or low down and encircled? All those kind of, it's called phenomenology, which is kind of about bringing your whole set of sensory perceptions to a place. So you're not just standing there going, oh, this standing stone is 7 meters high and it's made of this kind of sandstone or limestone or gritstone or whatever. You know, there's a 3.5 meter gap between this stone and that stone. Sure, we need all that stuff. We need the kind of calibrated radiocarbon dates. We need the sequential, careful excavation. But we also need a sense of, like, where does this sit in the landscape? How does it feel when you're in that place or looking on that place? Where can you see this place from? Where does it feel like it connects to? And I think those are the things that that for me certainly bring a place to life. And you're allowed to, I think, totally allowed to sort of stand there going, well, what would it have been like? I mean, would it have been spooky? Would this place been celebratory? Was this a place to meet up with your mates or kind of hook up with someone? Or was this a place of, like, reverence? Who was allowed here? Was it everybody? Was it, like, I don't know, the local community centre? Or was it this, like, sacred and special place where if you went, you'd, I don't know, drop down dead or something because you'd be cursed by the spirits? We don't know that stuff. And I think there's a certain point at which absolutely the foundation needs to be the kind of the scientific evidence that we've carefully and painstakingly built. But then from there, fill your boots, like, take a leap of imagination. Imagine not, you know, some kind of, if you're thinking about Woodhenge or the sanctuary up at the top of Overton Hill, which is quite close to Silbury Hill, what the archaeology can describe is that there are concentric rings of wooden posts. And you go, well, the most sterile interpretation of that is that they're like telegraph posts, like really straight and regular. They haven't got branches. You kind of strip the bark off and they've been put, you know, nice and neatly, all very neat and tidy and rationalised. Actually, you think, well, what if they were carved? What if they were daubed with blood? What if they had entrails or pieces of textile or flowers or skulls stuck to them? You know, what if they were actually trees that were turned upside down, like Henge, and so you've got the roots splaying out to the sky? What if they kept their branches so it looks like this weird petrified woodland grove up on the top of a windswept hill, and actually walking past you'd see this kind of skeletal branches like piercing the sky on the horizon? It's a very different experience to some kind of neat and orderly, I don't know, it would kind of feel like some kind of like modern architecture approach to monument building. So I think imagination is absolutely key. Experiencing the place, if you can get out and about, then absolutely do. If you can't, then we are blessed with so many ways to kind of do armchair spotting, looking at Google Earth or Bing Bird's Eye, where you get a really good kind of angle to the aerial photography. Looking at Ordnance Survey maps online, the National Library of Scotland, for some reason, they're absolutely hands down the best at their digitised map collections. And you can compare modern maps with old series of maps, so you can see how things have changed in your local town or village, or somewhere perhaps a more famous landscape that you might want to explore from a distance. So there's so many resources now to sort of go on an armchair spotting odyssey. But if you can, pull your boots on, get your woolly hat on and get out there, definitely.
Yeah, it's definitely about inspiring people and making them curious, right? Like, from just speaking to you now, I realize that anthropology is just about being curious about. So you can get all the spec you want, but if you're not, like, you need to have this extra essence about you where you're like, oh, but why? Why
Yeah, I
is
think
this
so.
rock here? It makes no sense. Why would a human do that? Why would a human pull a rock all the way from over there to here? Makes no sense.
It makes no sense. And I mean, fundamentally, humans do loads of stuff that makes no sense whatsoever. Um, and that was true in the past, just as it is today. I don't know what is the merit of getting like your smartwatch to kind of give a little jiggle and kind of show you some kind of graphic of fireworks because you've done a certain number of steps or you've got a certain run of chats on Snapchat or something. Like it's all a bit silly and meaningless, but and we do all sorts of things. But and then when you kind of think about if you're thinking about faith and sort of religious practices and ritual practices where actually what you do in the worldview that you're living, what you do really makes a difference. It makes a difference to the health and well-being of your family or to your animals or to whether the crops are going to grow or die, which will ultimately mean whether your animals and family grow or die. Is the sun going to come up the following day if you don't perform the correct rituals? That all of a sudden it stops being silly and it becomes absolutely deadly serious. So again, I think it's, but the why question is absolutely central, because otherwise you kind of stop short of trying to make sense of it as a human. You can describe it all you like, but that interpretation that will always change, that will always be informed by our own modern sensibilities and preconceptions, by our understanding of other sites and other cultural practices, that's always going to shift, but that's okay. That doesn't mean that speculating and wondering and trying to understand, that's part of the journey. And for me, that's why it's fun.
Thank you, that's brilliant. I think one of the best examples of so far that I've found personally that has stumped me and many others are the cup and ring stones. And for one of the episodes, I went up to Ilkley Moor and tried to find some for myself, which proved quite difficult. But we got there and we found a few. And then there is one. So I live in Sheffield, and it's next to the Peak District, and when you go in on the bus on the Peak District, there's this amazing cup and ring stone, which I didn't realise was a cup and ring stone for years, but it's this old rock that hangs over a road, and it's got like a slit through the rock which looks like a mouth, and someone's put two eyes on each side, and it looks like a toad, and it's called the Toadstone, and it's just always been there. It's just one of those things that I just never even questioned. And then for the project, I was studying cup and ring stones, and I realised these are cup and ring stones for fun. Like somebody's graffitied this, but this is on the Metholithic portal, right? So this is people having fun a long time ago.
So most of British rock art isn't the kind of stuff that you might imagine if you're thinking of those caves in Le Sceaux in France or Altamira in Spain, where you've got like buffalo, galloping, painted really beautifully, or handprints kind of with paint or ochre splattered around them. These kind of big, it's almost like walking into the National Gallery, but prehistoric. And that's all Ice Age art. But what we may have had that in the UK at some point, but it hasn't survived, if we ever did have it. The chances are probably that people were actually moving much more seasonally here, and so they perhaps weren't as settled enough to sit down and go, right, let's start the masterpiece. What we actually find when you talk about British rock art and ancient art is engravings into panels of rock, and it's much more subtle. It's a connoisseur's rock art, shall we call it? And one of the most typical motifs, kind of designs that we find are on either earth-fast boulders or exposed crags of rock, often kind of big boulders that are kind of laid flat in the earth and stuck into the earth. And it's called a cup and ring. So the cup is basically a little dip that has been artificially created, normally by sort of like scratching out a little bit and then using another stone to grind it deeper. And they tend to be between 3 and 10 centimetres wide, so little, and not that deep, so 2 or 3 centimetres deep, so quite shallow little cup shapes on the rock surface. And then, so that's the cup. And then the ring is a concentric grooved ring that encircles the cup. So you've kind of got a little cup and then you've got a ring that goes around it. And then you get other aspects of these kind of repeating motifs, things like grooves. So as you can imagine, a kind of a line, not normally straight, a little bit sinuous, a little bit more organic looking. Sometimes the groove comes out from the centre of the cup and ring, so it sort of comes out and through the ring. They're sometimes referred to as gutters because it's like a tadpole. So the centre with a little tail and a circle around it, like a halo shape around it. Or sometimes you get a cup and ring here and you get a cup and ring here, and then you've got a groove that joins the two. And then sometimes you've got other things like little dots, so just a cup without the ring. Sometimes you get a cup with lots of rings around it, so multiple concentric rings. There's one cup and ring mark on a site called Achnabrek, which is in Kilmartin Glen in Argyll, which has 9 concentric rings. And it's a whopper. It's really big. It's really cool. Definitely worth going to visit Kilmartin Glen. And so you've got all these different kind of features. Sometimes it looks like most of these date from the Bronze Age, so some of them possibly a little bit earlier. It's quite hard to date them. So probably not earlier than 4000 BC, which would plant it firmly in the Neolithic, the late Stone Age. But probably most of it is later, so from the Bronze Age, from about 2400 BC to about 1500 BC. And then it looks like these sites, they're not destroyed, but new ones aren't being created. So that perhaps suggests that there's some kind of change in practice, or maybe they're doing the same pictures and designs, but on something that's portable. You could do it on a piece of hide or a piece of wood or a small piece of stone that you carry around, but then they don't survive as well, so we don't find them. So there's like more than 7,000 different known, they call them panels, where you've got a kind of a collection of these little patterns and motifs. So we know about 7,000 known rock art panels in England and Wales and Scotland, but there is inevitably more still undiscovered, because you've got to really get your eye in, and you've got to find a low rock that is somewhere probably quite inconspicuous. And nowadays, a lot of it may well be covered by vegetation or by a layer of peat. I'm not saying that we should be going around digging them up, because at the point you dig them up, you're potentially damaging a very precious archaeological site, so please don't do that, folks. But also, once you expose it to the weather, you expose it to a much greater chance of it being destroyed. And sometimes they've found that actually if you try and peel off the vegetation that's grown over a stone, you end up actually peeling the layer of stone off that has the rock art in it. It just crumbles. And you're like, oh, oops, I can't put that back now. So better to absolutely leave it be, because these are archaeological sites and would be scheduled if they were known about. So they would be protected in law. So you have to act as if they are already protected in law. If you want to get involved with kind of trying to find new rock art sites, then get in touch with a local archaeology group, and they can advise you which bits might have already been surveyed, which bits are good to be surveyed, and give you clues on how to go about doing it as well. So like you're doing it archaeologically as opposed to a bit like a rock art treasure hunter, which is not good. We don't know anything about what they were for. So that's the point, Elise, that we get to speculate wildly. Was it part of some ritual? Is it some kind of mystical pictogram language? Is it some kind of abstract storytelling. Maybe the act of making the pictures was the designs was the important bit, not the design that got left behind. Some people have said that maybe it's a way of sort of marking territory, like these are the cup and ring stone people. But the thing is, they're pretty subtle. Even if they were painted or daubed with some kind of colour, or you could put kind of a red powder or a kind of ground white chalky colour, they would still be pretty subtle. You'd have to basically be standing above the rock art panel and know where it is to look for before you spot it. So I find them really enigmatic, and you find them mostly in upland areas. So some of the best places are in Northumberland, County Durham. There's quite a few sites on Ilkley Moor in West Yorkshire, and then up in the west of Scotland, in Argyll, Kilmartin Glen is just there's lots and lots, but they're some of my personal favourites. Not many people know about them. Even people who regularly go walking on, say, Rumbold's Moor, which is part of Ilkley Moor, they'll be like, "There's a what?" Because I remember going up when Hidden Histories first came out. I spoke at the Ilkley Literary Festival, and I did a talk, and we organised a kind of a guided walk. So we met at the car park, and we went for a little trundle. And these were all folk who lived locally and were kind of quite keen to get outdoors. It's not that they never went outside, but they just didn't know. They didn't know what it was. And I think actually, if you kind of, now that we've all got smartphones, or most of us have smartphones, that it's actually really easy to find, because you can find like GPS rock art trails, and it will literally take you, to the meter. Whereas previously you'd have to have like a map and compass, and it would be a bit of an orienteering fest, or you'd have to be taken by someone. Whereas now you can, go respectfully, go at a strange time of day, and you will have the place to yourself. And it is just the most, I find it really magical. Because they're like screaming out these weird panels full of strange human shapes and whirls and gutters and grooves, and you can't help but kind of want to touch them and just go, what were you doing 4,000 years ago? What does this mean? Is this an offering? Is this a place where you did some kind of scary rituals or beautiful rituals? Who was here? Who was allowed to come here? Was it an everyday kind of thing? Was it a special kind of thing? And unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how much you like the mystery, we don't at the moment know. But I think I've had some of the best experiences just sitting next to really weird stones, just going, what are you? What did it mean?
In a way, it's really nice that people don't know about them, because they're going to be more protected. Just in general, because people they don't care enough to destroy it, potentially. Which is what I get worried about, which is, what's happened in recent events, which makes me really sad. Which we'll talk about later. It makes me sad. Okay. But the amazing thing is that, houses crumble and will all probably one day be extinct, and yet those cup and ring stones will still bloody be there. They're never going.
That's it. Slowly, really subtly, just keeping going. I love the idea that actually maybe some of these kind of motifs, these patterns, they kind of look a bit mystical. Like I totally buy the idea of people like, these must have been aliens because they look like alien landing pads. I really like the idea that maybe these patterns and shapes were replicated on people's bodies as maybe tattoos or body paint. So can you imagine a group of people who've gone up at, say, I don't know, the full moon? Because we always think about people going to monuments and prehistoric sites in daylight. So let's scrap that. Let's go at nighttime with flaming torches or kind of processing in the dark. Maybe you don't have any lights, because actually the dark isn't that scary and you can see much further than you think. But you get to these sites and the stars, no light pollution, so you can see the Milky Way above you. Maybe the moon is rising, or you do it at a full moon, you do it at a new moon where there is no moonlight. And And I kind of just love the idea that there are people gathered around this stone with all these weird markings, and they have those same markings on their body or on their clothing. And you kind of go, oh, maybe this was a motif that was on the doorposts of their homes. Maybe this was a motif that they would paint onto the flanks of their cattle. We don't know. But maybe it wasn't just on the stones. Maybe the stones was where it was a repository of those marks that meant something either to the tribe, to the ancestors, to the story of their creation. We don't know. They're linked to that land. But I kind of love the idea that actually, you know, if you kind of zoomed down as the time traveller, you'd be like, hold on a minute, there's cup and rings everywhere. Long barrows date from the Neolithic, the late Stone Age. And they're generally the oldest monuments that you'll find in the landscape that are visible to the naked eye. And they're, in the most simple explanation, burial monuments that are long rather than round. So a kind of oblong shape, an oval or lozenge shape. Depending on where in the country you are, they're either made of a mound of earth or a heap of stone. So you can get long cairns as well in more upland areas where there isn't as much soil, literally, to dig up and put into a heap. And we find them in all sorts of places. Sometimes people used to think that they were quite simple monuments, that you'd have some burials or cremated remains in the middle, and then the tribe, the village, the community would create a kind of a raised mound over it. The thing about long mounds is that they tend not to be the burial place of just one individual. They are a communal burial site, so you get more than one individual, and the chances are they didn't all die in one kind of calamitous event. They didn't all die at the same time, possibly quite close in time to one another. It might be, I don't know, a year's worth of dead people. But at some point they get kind of, their remains get gathered together. So maybe they were in a kind of a bone house or a kind of an enclosure where you put the dead bodies to kind of rot away, to be picked clean by birds and animals, and then you'd gather up the bones and then raise this monument. Or maybe you'd leave them exactly there and you'd raise the monument over them. And for later people, these are the earliest farmers who come to Britain. So they're coming from the continent, and these seem like very permanent monuments, kind of memorials that are made of the earth. I think that's probably quite significant, that they're putting their people or their ancestors or the ancients or the kind of the spirits into the earth in this kind of mound. And I think if you're farming, your connection to the land is absolutely key, because you are reliant on it. Sure, you're probably also using wild foods. Maybe you're hunting or trapping kind of game. You're collecting berries, you know, in the same way that we might go and pick wild apples and gather mushrooms and collect up blackberries and rose hips and whatever. But the bulk of your economy, the bulk of your work is in growing crops and raising livestock. Now, we shouldn't think of it in a kind of modern industrialized farming capacity. It's not like they've got a field full of black and white dairy cows that they bring into the milking parlour. It's much smaller scale than that, and people would have had lots of different things going on. But I think fundamentally, if your connection to the land fails, then you are facing starvation. There's no kind of fallback option. There's no like, the barley didn't grow, better go to Tesco's. That's not happening. The barley doesn't grow, then your kids are going to die over the winter, or your livestock is going to die over the winter, which is possibly worse because it means that your demise is going to be slower and more painful. So these long mounds are like really intriguing. Some of them have chambers that you still go into. Some of them have stone chambers that have been filled up, so there's no obvious entrance, but the stones, there are big stones arranged within the earth, and you'd only be able to find out about them either through geophysical examination or through an excavation. And then there's other mounds that appear to be just a big heap of earth. And of course, they've been around for 5,500 years, some of them. And so they've been modified, ignored, enriched, depending on kind of all the people who've come after them, what they thought of the big mound. Sometimes it's sort of described in medieval terms that have kind of survived to kind of modern times. It's a giant's grave. It's the devil's grave. It might be, there's one in Oxfordshire called Wayland Smithy, which is Wayland being a kind of Norse and Anglo-Saxon god, a kind of a mystical smith, a blacksmith. So at some point in the 9th century, this name gets associated with this tomb, which is actually, 5,500 years old. So it's not Wayland, because Wayland didn't exist 5,500 years ago, mythically. But at some point, people have tried to explain what on earth this big thing is that is kind of clearly special, but we don't know quite what it is.
And like, just with like the cup and ring stones, did you see a theme throughout like your travels in the UK, where, because it strikes me as very strange how someone from, say, Ireland and someone from the south of England are two very different people in very different environments and tribes, and yet we find like cup and ring stones are looking the same across the country, and like these motifs of how they bury the dead are very similar. Are the what they call long barrows, the long barrows. Did you find, because I haven't visited many long barrows, I visited perhaps 2 or 3, and for me they were very similar, but I thought, well, maybe that's because I'm in the same kind of area. But what about you? What have you seen on your travels? Is it the same, or?
So there are kind of regional styles, regional variations, and you can get really into the details of whether this is a Severn Trent kind of chambered cairn, or whether you're up in Orkney, they get things called stalled cairns, where basically the kind of the central burial chamber, which can be entered, and even at the time, people would have been able to come and go in and out of this tomb. It doesn't get kind of sealed up and filled in. It's still accessible, and it's got these kind of upstanding flagstones. So it's like there's like little stalls, with different arrangements of body parts and bones. So there's kind of skulls in one bit, there's leg bones in another bit, there's more male skeletons over here, there's more female skeletons over here, so maybe there's some kind of division of gendering or something like that of the space. So there are differences regionally, but the principle of putting at least some of the members of your community into a huge, hulking, great, visible earthen and stone monument does seem quite consistent. And you find them in France as well, you find them in Spain, the kind of megalithic cultures across the kind of, they call it the Western Atlantic seaboard, so basically where the Atlantic Ocean hits either the British Isles, Ireland, France, Spain, Portugal, all that bit, seem to have kind of shared practices with subtle regional variations. I think sometimes we think that people in prehistory never moved around and didn't talk to each other because they stayed in one tiny valley and, married their cousin. But actually people travelled a really long way. The first farmers who come to the UK, a generation or two, they've travelled from the Black Sea. And they've come through Europe, they've travelled up from Spain and Portugal and France, they've got in boats, they've come to this kind of mystical isle where there's hunter-gatherers, but not that many of them, and they're settled. Like, people are, I think humans are always intrigued by what's over the horizon. That is a kind of truth of our species, I think. And the other thing is that we are hyper-social. We like talking to each other. Now, you might not want to talk to the strangers because the strangers are them and we're us, and actually it's like this kind of like exotic or dangerous other. But ideas travel very quickly in the same way that metalworking technology, the idea of that travels very quickly. And with that, there's a kind of big debate of how much is it people moving and how much is it ideas moving. So through trade networks, through people being presented with an artifact or hearing about, I went to this place and it was most remarkable and it looked like this and they do this weird thing with their dead. And you're like, what? I think we've always been fascinated by that, in the same way that if I travel to somewhere, well, it could be very, nearby. I live in Hertfordshire, and you go, do you know what they do in London? Oof, it's so weird. I don't need to travel to the other side of the world to kind of have an experience that is alien to my cultural preconceptions. But it's still fascinating, and it may still also influence my understanding of the world. You can't unsee what you've seen. You can't unthink the thoughts and kind of different ways of honouring the dead or dealing with the dead or making it safe or, ensuring the best possible outcomes for the future. So I think basically people have always wanted to talk to each other. We've always been quite keen on new and weird stuff, and inevitably we sort of bring those practices in. Whether they thought of themselves as a shared community with kind of shared aspects of identity, I don't know. That's much harder to say. In the same way that I wear blue jeans and I eat hamburgers, but I don't think of myself as an American. So there may be some cultural aspects that have been absorbed into my identity or my culture or my community, but I've taken them and I'm doing my own thing with them. I haven't kind of taken them in one coherent piece. So what it means to me when I eat a hamburger might be very different to what it means when someone else does, even though archaeologically it would look like the same thing is happening.
I have to say, just from listening to you there, I've definitely taken for granted how connected they might have been back then. Those people who are still we. I think that a lot of people are surely ignorant of that as well. I think that a lot of people probably think that your classic Ooga Booga is actually not socialized at all and doesn't want to know what the other tribe is doing over there, even if they've just got bronze. And what's that weird thing? Well, maybe we should talk to them, because if they know how to do something and we don't, then we could be in trouble if everyone's caught up and we're not. Because it's always advancing and talking, and I love that. I always thought that we were way more disconnected back then, but that's so untrue, really. Like today we're disconnected, right? So
well, actually it's not our kind of lofty principles. It's one, like you say, one-upmanship and competition, and not getting left behind and going, oh well, they think they're so great doing those mounds, let's see what we can do. Come on guys. And actually, it's competition and status and posturing and prestige, but it still drives innovation and change. Yeah. Nice. Of course, the other thing is that a long mound or a long barrow survives much, much more than all the other potential burial practices that might have been used. So an open-air cremation, very unlikely that we would be able to see the archaeological evidence of that unless they dig a pit and line it with stones and put the little shards of bone into a cloth bag or a leather bag or something like that and put it carefully into the earth. Maybe that might survive as a kist or something. If you just had the sky burial aspect, so you lay out your dead in the open air and you let the animals and the birds scatter the bones, and then eventually it's sort of, there's a few bits of human bone knocking about in the soil, and then, you put more dead people in. We just chucking someone in the sea, you just wouldn't ever find it. And so sometimes we have to sort of remind ourselves that the evidence that we have that has survived isn't the whole picture. There may have been lots of other things happening. It's just that we don't know about it because we don't see the evidence. So again, I kind of think it's worth a bit of imaginative speculation, because we don't have enough bones of bodies in long mounds that we know about to account for all the people who must have been alive. So not everyone was getting put in a long mound or a long barrow. Even if your community has that practice, not everyone gets that treatment at death. So what happened to everyone else? We don't know. Maybe they just got chucked in the ditch. Maybe they got treated in a different way because they were a different kind of person and that was the right thing to do. We don't know.
Has every long barrow been excavated that we know?
No.
Okay.
No, so there's a really famous one that hasn't been excavated called, well, there's quite a few, but East Kennet Long Barrow, which is close to West Kennet Long Barrow, which is in the Avebury World Heritage Site. There's no public rights of way, so to go and visit it, you have to trespass or ask the farmer's permission, or landowner's permission. And it's kind of in this wooded area, and no one's ever been in it. And if it's anything like West Kennet Long Barrow, chances are, if it were to be excavated, you would find some kind of blocking stones and then some kind of stone built chambers within, and we don't know what's inside. I mean, that's true of lots of long mounds. That's true of most round barrows as well. So Bronze Age round barrows, which are those kind of lumpy, bumpy things that you find in fields or at the top of a hillside, or actually cairns as well in upland areas. If you go hiking up a hill, some of those cairns of stones on high points, some of them are kind of walkers' cairns, navigational cairns, but some of them are actually Bronze Age burial mounds. And most of those haven't been excavated either. They tend to be excavated if there's a kind of really credible research project, like we have to excavate this because we want to know this specific thing, or if they're at risk. So they're eroding into the sea, they're at risk of vandalism or something like that, where you think the argument is we need to kind of make safe the information that we can because it's otherwise might get lost completely. And I think that's absolutely right, because archaeology excavating is fundamentally destructive. Once you've dug it up, you can't put it back in. But it does mean that those sites that are currently protected and not considered to be at high risk. I mean, funding is short, so it's no small thing to kind of start it, and so people tend not to. Again, as well, I think because what we think of as our cutting edge techniques will be absolutely superseded in the future, in the same way that when we look at Victorians digging up stuff, even if they were doing it to the absolute best intentions, to the best of their abilities, you kind of look at the drawings and go, it's a bit rubbish, isn't it? Like, we've lost loads of information because of the way they dug this up, the way they excavated this site. People in the future will look at the things that we've done with our kind of spanky geophys and our 3D LiDAR and our 3D modelling and just go, oh God, they were rubbish. What were they doing? Destroying everything. So so I think we have to be, your hands itch to kind of dig it up and see what's there, but actually sometimes the more responsible thing is to leave it well alone.
And sometimes the mystery is better. Like, it makes it so much more exciting that there are still spaces that haven't been destroyed effectively by anyone's hands. It's sacred. So I bought this book in a random shop, and I was like, this is amazing, like this is what I do, but somebody else is doing it and writing about it, and so that's how I researched you. So because of this book, I started looking more, and I was visiting Thor's Cave for a video I was going to do on Thor's Cave, and nearby is a little barrow, and I researched it because I was inspired by a book, and I was like, what's nearby? Because obviously when you get a cave, an open cave like Thor's Cave, it's quite nicely sheltered, so there's probably some history there, and probably in the area too. And I found this long barrow with quarter of a Wikipedia article. It's got a few lines on it, and it's like, well, it's in a field and no one cares about it, and the farmer put a nice long stone wall over it, and no one cares. it's it's a mound. And then I saw it and I was like, well, yeah, they're right, it's a mound, but how fascinating. It was, I think it was, it had something important about it, and it looked quite big, and yet it's been neglected and probably not dug up or excavated or anything. Like, it's probably not been touched. And it inspired me so much to make the series, because I felt that people, I think I'm a bit of a show and tell. I think, at primary school I loved show and tell. It was my favourite bit. And I just wanted to make videos and documentaries and series on how much we miss because we don't care.
Yeah, you're right. So the site you're describing, Long Low,
Yes.
it is absolutely unique, and there's quite a few theories about what this big long low mound is. Is it actually a long barrow, so that would be from the late Stone Age, or is it actually two Bronze Age round barrows at either end, and then they kind of filled in the middle, possibly to make it look like an even more ancient monument? So I love the idea that people in the Bronze Age are going, hang on a minute, guys, if we fill in the gap between those two old burials, we can make it look like one of those really, really old ones where the dragons lived, or, whatever. Or maybe it was a long mound, and then later people used or sort of co-opted the power of this ancient site by putting two of their famous or celebrated individuals or families or whoever it was at either end. And then, of course, you've got 4,000 odd years of people mucking about with it. So probably, I don't know, medieval farmers or Roman farmers going, oh, we need a bit of earth or some rubble. Let's go and dig it out of there. Or, those bloody sheep keep going over the high ground and then we can't see where they are. Let's put a stone wall up. So I love those sites because they're so honest and there for the exploration, that you can just like tramp about a field and stare at things that may have been the most sacred or mystical thing that someone had ever seen in their life. And now they're utterly overlooked. And they're, archived and they're recorded in some kind of database that no one really looks at. And the local archaeologist might be like, oh yeah, there's an entry on that somewhere, but no one's doing anything to it. So we'll just leave it be. And I think, like here in the UK, we absolutely take these sites for granted because they're everywhere. And then you go to somewhere like, I remember going to Sydney in Australia, and someone said, oh, have you gone to see the historic quarter? And it was because there were a couple of houses from, 1870. And I was like, it's quite new. We've got stuff that's like 6,000 years old. And they're like, what? Just there? And you go, yeah. I mean, obviously, Australia has a lot of that too. There've been people in Australia for more than 60,000 years. And then we get into a whole conversation about colonialism and whose history we're talking about. But I think that just the tenner penniness of ancient sites in the UK is something that utterly baffles and bemuses people who come to visit the British Isles, and that we're kind of either ignorant or complacent about it. You're like, oh, that old lump in that field? Yeah, it's there. That's it.
No biggie. Just 6,000 years ago, man. It's all right.
Yeah. It's where the king was buried. Come on, have some respect. Or the queen, or a big horse, or I don't know, whatever it is.
In terms of caves as well, have caves been commonly used in Britain throughout the years, or is it we see less of that? Or
so caves, natural caves have always been used by people from our kind of early ancestral species. Often you find evidence of habitation and activity in caves and rock shelters, and that's absolutely true of the British Isles as well. Normally natural caves are found in limestone areas because that's where caves form, the kind of the rainwater percolates through and basically dissolves parts of the rock, and so you get caverns and shelters or undercuts. And the earliest use of caves that we have evidence for are things like in Cresswell Crags, where we know that people in the kind of the warm bit in the middle of the last ice age, people were using those caves, actually probably cannibalizing, possibly ritual cannibalism, because they're using skulls to change the shape. They've kind of modified skulls to make what looks like a bowl, and you can find kind of cut marks and pattern marks on human bones as well. Also bite marks, so they were definitely eating each other as well as doing kind of weird kind of art. And then you find the oldest human burial in the UK. That's even earlier. That's about 33,000 years old. That's in Paviland Cave in the south of Wales on the Gower Peninsula, and that was a kind of a young male skeleton that was covered with red ochre, with little rods of mammoth ivory that had been carefully carved. We don't really know what they were. Maybe blanks for jewellery making or bead making. Maybe a kind of tiny little magician's wand. We don't know. Speculate at will. And that body appears to have been buried carefully with a mammoth skull, although the mammoth skull went missing at some point. So that's the Red Lady of Paviland, because previously it was thought that it was a female skeleton, and it was covered in red because maybe it was a prostitute from the Roman era, and it turns out that's absolute nonsense. It's a male skeleton. It's about 33,000 years old, and it was very much an Ice Age person who came to visit when it was warm enough, probably hunting big game like mammoth. And then you find loads and loads and loads and loads and loads of evidence of people using caves, because they're kind of handy places. They're dry, or they can be dry. They can be sheltered. They can be. They kind of have a great potential for kind of imaginative ritual or spiritual use as well, because it feels like you're in the earth. And so we find evidence of art, but also like kind of hunting camps, or a good place to kip over if you're travelling across a landscape. It's sort of like a ready-made nature's tent, little house. So I think people have always attributed caves, people have always used caves either for ritual purposes or for practical purposes, because they're good for both. They're good for using, and they're also good for thinking with.
The recent events with the cutting of the Sycamore Gap Tree by Hadrian's Wall has made me realise how some spaces are special and uniquely special, but they become more iconic, perhaps through destruction, perhaps through like the irony of everyone wanting to visit this stump now because the tree's gone, and it's adding to its history, and we know it's going to hopefully regrow back, probably not to what it was, but may you, if you have any comment to say, I would love to hear your thoughts. Essentially. So yeah, it's a really funny thing, isn't it? That I read a comment on social media shortly after the news broke that someone had come and cut down the tree, kind of saying, hang on a minute, we are losing species, we've got a biodiversity crisis, we've lost thousands of ancient and veteran trees. In Sheffield, they cut down all the street trees. HS2 is like mowing holes through ancient woodlands. Why are we not weeping about all those trees? Each one of them represents the home of thousands of different invertebrates and birds and animals, and we're destroying these habitats. Why are we all weeping over this one blooming tree that wasn't that great, and actually is this one survivor of what should be a woodland? The reason it stood out is because it's the only one. It shouldn't be the only one. It should be in a woodland. And I was like, well, I think fundamentally we're not. It's that emotional thing, isn't it? It's the storytelling animal that we are. That one tree that stands out, that is iconic, that sort of has a personality, a name, that kind of features culturally, becomes more important. Partly because it represents the anonymous others, but also because it's just kind of easier to get your head around the loss of one tree
rather than this kind of big idea of, you know, a nature crisis. Like, what's that mean? No one knows really. I mean, lots of people do, but it's just hard to get your head around it. It's hard to care on an emotional, like, gut level. So I think, obviously, it's pretty devastating that the tree got chopped down, and whatever the circumstances, you know, there's a lot of distressed people clearly in this story. I think possibly it helps us understand that we shouldn't take it for granted that these either natural heritage sites or kind of human historic heritage sites are safe, and that we can turn a blind eye and kind of just assume they're all right, in the same way that lots of archaeological sites are being targeted by illegal metal detecting and digging. So it's got this like romantic name of night hawking, but actually it's just theft. It's theft and vandalism and destruction for personal gain. That, you know, if you kind of under the cover of darkness dig stuff up and sell it on eBay or sell it to private collectors, you're destroying our shared heritage. But people don't get so upset about it because it's kind of not as visible. It's not as obviously visual as chopping down an enormous tree in this kind of iconic gap in Hadrian's Wall. So I think it's entirely understandable that everyone got very upset about the Sycamore Gap Tree, and it's right that we got upset about it getting chopped down. I think the challenge for people who work in heritage now and people who work in communications and all of us members of the public who care about this stuff is, how do we harness that caring and that emotion and transfer it into a more wider sense of responsibility for all the things that don't have names and don't have, you know, like massive Instagram hashtags attached to them.
Yes, it's like it's become, the chopping of the tree has become a martyr for a movement that it could have been anything, but it was the tree, you know. And it makes, going back to our whole conversation, I'm terrified for the future, and I think I know I shouldn't be. It'll be fine, but
well, it might not be. You're
no,
right.
Don't say it, Mary-Ann. No. No.
Sorry.
We have to educate ourselves, I believe, a lot more, because if somebody really understood, if somebody really was educated, they went out, and I mean education in a way, not like formal education, but in a way where you personally in your heart understand how these places make you feel. Like when you go to a cup and ring stone and you really understand it and like how it makes you feel, you wouldn't destroy it. And I think the more we learn to love our countryside and love what we have, the less likely we'll be destroying these places. But I do get a little bit worried.
Elise, I think you're absolutely right. I think I worry as well whether it's going to be all right. And I genuinely am not sure, because we are pretty slow to respond to very obvious threats to our own livable environment. That's the thing. Let alone what some people might think of as the kind of the luxury of heritage. You know, we're talking about breathable air and drinkable water, and, you know, the maintenance of an agricultural system that can actually support us, and the healthy natural world that is the basis for that. Like, none of it works if that isn't there. So I think maybe the upset around the Sycamore Gap can be taken as a kind of a good sign that people cared, that people noticed. I mean, the only thing I think that would be more tragic about that tree getting cut down is that if the tree got cut down and everyone went, it's just a tree, isn't it? But the risk is that tree is kind of some kind of special tree that has a personality, and so we can be extra sad about that and still not really care about the other trees. So yeah, I don't know. The one thing, actually, bringing it back to what we were talking about landscape and understanding landscape and places, is that we cannot understand these things in isolation, that people respond deeply and emotionally to places and to landscapes. And so not only as kind of landscape spotters and kind of archaeological detectives, we need to understand that's what people were doing in the past, that they weren't thinking about artifacts or monument types. They were living in places. They had homes and special places in the landscape, just as we do now. And I think the Sycamore Gap Tree really captured that sense that actually there are special places in the landscape, and sometimes we only realise just how special is when they're under threat or have been destroyed.
Where can we find your books? Where can we follow you? Where can we get to see more of you, essentially?
Oh, how very kind of you. So you can find me on Twitter, X, and Instagram at Mary-Ann Ochota. My website is www.maryannochota.com, and you can buy Hidden Histories and Secret Britain from all your favourite local independent bookshops. If you want to buy it online, buy it from bookshop.uk, which is the independent version of that other really massive online store that sells books. Or if you want a signed copy, go to my website, maryannochota.com, and I will happily send you a signed and dedicated copy if you would like.
Oh my goodness, I might do that. Please, I'm going to do that. Thank you so much.
I'll send you a copy, don't worry.
Oh, sweetie. Thank you. And just off the record, you're amazing. Thank you. And thank you for being such an inspiration. And I really hope that what we've done today will inspire other young women. And I don't mean to exclude men. I would love to inspire men. Men are amazing, but like to inspire young women. And I just think that is such an amazing thing to do. So thank you for inspiring me. And I hope that we can inspire more women.
I'm so flattered. Absolutely. Yeah. Come on, let's step up. Yeah. Absolutely.
Thank you so much, and I hope to see you in the future as well.
It's been a genuine pleasure.